Part of the original equipment with auto knitter circular sock machines was a heel hook. Here it is in the manual. It's item V. At this point in time, many of them are missing, and the manual shows you how it was intended to be used, but since I never had one, and at the time that I began knitting with a circular sock machine, everybody was using heel forks. I just embraced the heel fork idea, created a special version that worked better for me and is now in my book, Cheap Tricks and Cool Tools for Machine Knitters, and went with it. For more challenging yarns where you really need to target the weight, I found that the same design using latch needles was helpful. But lately, with my new 48-slot cylinder, I have been branching out into more challenging yarns. This is alpaca, very fuzzy and not very resilient. And I got out all of the assorted weights I've mentioned, and they do work. But knitting the heels is pretty challenging with these yarns. So when I came upon a video of a woman using a hook like the original hook and getting absolutely stellar results, I was curious, and I really developed an interest in trying out the original V-hook style. So Jack agreed to help me make one and document the process so that if it was helpful, other do-it-yourselfers might be able to make one also. The width at the top of the V should equal the width of the narrowest row measuring across the needle. The drop of the V is open to personal interpretation. We decided to aim for a 7-inch total, so half of a 36-inch welding rod will do the job. Jack is using the simplest tools possible in the hope that everybody will have access to them. If you were not able to cut with fence pliers as he is, you could use a hacksaw or even bolt cutters. The rods have a logo on each end at a flat spot that would interfere with making the hook, so those have to be cut off. He'll get the curve at the bottom by bending around this pipe, so you need to know the circumference around the pipe. Add it to 2 times the degree of drop you want, plus enough for the creation of the hooks, minus the depth that the curve at the bottom contributes in order to get a precise length. Or you could just take our word for it that starting with 18 inches of rod will give you an adequate length to create a useful tool. Jack attempted to complete the bend around the pipe with pliers just to see if it could be done without any special tools. And that was a success, but when it came to making the legs of the V go in the exact right direction, so as to get the 2-inch opening at the top of the V that we had decided on based on the needle span at the narrowest part of the heel. He did find it necessary to clamp the circle in a vise, then put a nut in position to help create the proper space and angle, and use a long pipe to bend the legs of the V back up into the correct position. Using this method of bending worked well, but it was impossible to get the bend perfectly centered, so then we had to even up the legs. So the structure is basically complete, but now we need 2 perfect little hooks on the end so that the hooks will hang in the fabric properly without damaging it. And we tried out several tools. I'll let Jack explain.
I did the rough tapering with this rotary Dremel style tool with a sculptured tip on it. Then I really made the shape I wanted with this rough mill file. And it's only got one good side left, but that side works. Then I did my final smoothing out where I could very carefully use this one to make sure that I had the shape I wanted all the way down the shaft. And I'm going to use this round file, which is really fine, to sculpture the hook once I put the bend in it.
Creating these nice hooks was the most time-consuming part of the project. After the tips were sculpted, Jack used a portable torch to heat them and bent them over when red hot. And it took 3 or 4 stages to create the bend he thought was ideal. For reference, for those of you who are metal workers and might attempt this, I've sped up the film of the heating and bending to 3 times real-life speed. Of course, smoothing the finish is super important because we'll be hanging it in knitted fabric, sometimes in very valuable yarn, so we don't want any snags. In addition to that, we may have our fingers under there without our eyes on the area, so that's another reason to make sure of smoothness. So here's the finished tool. The question is it really an improvement? Let's go try it out. And the answer is definitely yes. It did take me an adjustment period, as a new tool always will, learning to get it hung evenly and not to disturb the little hooks once they're in position. The other sock knitter that I saw in the video only had to move her V-hook one time. With the alpaca, I found that I did have to move it a little bit more often than that, but much less often than my collection of forks. Also, due to the fuzziness of alpaca, there's a tendency for the new stitch to catch on the old and refuse to knit off even though the machine grabbed it correctly. That happened a great deal less to me using the V-hook than it has been with my assortment of forks and needle weights. Here you see me practicing. It's super important that the hook be absolutely centered on the heel or toe stitches. And if you feel a little bit more pressure is needed, press the hook and the weight away from you rather than pulling down, because that's what actually increases the pressure. I love that there is more room under the machine so that the assortment of weights doesn't get in each other's way, because now there's only one and there's room for my hand to reach down and do something if I need to. It is very easy to dislodge the hook if you reach down to adjust, so you have to be very conscious of that. But this is only the first pair of socks I've made using it. It is alpaca, which is quite challenging stuff to knit, and it's performing really well. So I have a high opinion of this tool. Alpaca has to be knitted a little bit more loosely than other sock yarns in order to allow it to loft properly when washed. With that in mind, it is especially impressive how nice and tight the heel looks straight off of the machine. This is just off, not even rested. I hope if you follow this video and make a V-hook heel tool that you enjoy yours as much as I am sure I will enjoy mine.